I was never going to sit in an office. As far as I was concerned, in my head, I was going to be a household name, and I didn't really have a plan B. I joined in the days when the culture wasn't so good. Car crashes, rail crashes, plane crashes. I know 9 times out of 10 how this is going to end. I went to my mother's own death, and that day ended up being sort of the worst day of my life. I'd give anything to have her back. Things build and build and build. We all have to recognise our limitations, and that's an important part of learning who you are. I can look back now and say, do you know what? I probably wasn't actually good enough. It makes you realise what's important. There are angels in the dark sometimes. I want to run an ultra marathon on every continent. The saying is mind the camels. If the camels catch you, you're at the back and they'll take you out of the race. And the person that goes out to the desert is very different to the person that comes back.
Today's guest then is James Ball, and he's a station commander in UK's firefighting service. James, welcome to the show, mate.
Thank you, Phil. Thanks for having me.
Great to have you. Listen, the way I'm going to do today, I want to find out all about you, all about what you do, all about what makes you tick, and all about what you want to do in the future. And that's basically in a nutshell what we're going to try and get out of you today. So if we start this interview then with little James. How was little James? What was he like as a kid?
Little James, you know, I don't really have a sob story about my childhood as such. I think actually I had quite a nice childhood and a good upbringing, and then I didn't really want for anything. I didn't live in poverty or anything like that. So I look back on my childhood sort of quite fondly. Yes, I can reflect now and think, you know, I wasn't particularly close. You know, we weren't. I didn't hug my dad and all that sort of stuff, you know.
A lot of people didn't in those days,
No,
did they? Do you know what I mean?
know,
It's a bit of like, what are you doing, son? Do you
yeah,
know what I mean?
a psychologist might turn around and say I've got issues with intimacy, but you know, we just didn't have that relationship. My dad was a disciplinarian, you know, I was a mummy's boy, like a lot of people, and I was pretty close to my parents. And then, you know, I actually feel pretty bad as I grew up. I did start to rebel against, you know, in school and certain levels of authority, and I feel really bad looking back on that. You know, I gave my parents a really hard time, but they stuck by me. And it's, you know, the old cliches, isn't it? That, you know, you don't appreciate your parents till you're older and all that sort of stuff. It really was that, you know, when I got older, I really felt bad and wanted to get closer to my parents. And, you know,
you also suddenly realised that the whole thing's a ticking clock as well, isn't it? Do you know what I mean?
Exactly. And I've lost my mum in a tragic circumstances which we may come on to, but and you know, I'd give anything to have her back now and tell her you know, tell her that I love her and all that, you know, which we didn't do in our family. We weren't like that sort of family. And
a lot of people were like that. But what about school and that? Were you good at school? Did you excel?
I didn't. Academically, I coasted. I think that's probably the best word. I was capable, but I was probably quite lazy. I got into sport as I got older. I was quite a chubby little kid, to be honest, and I wasn't really into sports initially. And then I got given a detention by the rugby coach, and he made me do rugby training instead of detention. And I accidentally tackled someone. I think I probably tripped over, and they fell over me. But I got praise in sport, and it was around the same time I got a growth spurt, and I, you know, at sort of 12 years old, and I was all of a sudden I was over 6 foot, and then I got massively into my rugby, and then, you know,
you did well at rugby, didn't you? Rugby was one of your things, wasn't it?
Yeah. So I ended up sort of playing semi-professionally. I probably didn't fulfil my potential. I don't want to be one of these people that goes, you know, oh, I could have, you know, how everyone says, oh, if it wasn't for my knee injury,
Mate,
I could have made it.
I could have played for England in football, but I was rubbish.
Yeah. Do you know what? I look back and I look at some of my friends that I did play with back then who went on to elite level, and now I can say, without an ego, looking back, at the time I'd have never have allowed myself to say it, because as far as I was concerned, in my head, I was going to be a household name. But I can look back now and say, do you know what? I probably wasn't actually good enough. I can say that now, you know, and that's fine. But did I take all of my chances and the opportunities that were presented to me? No, I didn't, because like a lot of young lads, I thought I was blessed with this gift. I could play rugby, but I could also go out drinking.
Yeah, so I did the
chasing
bars,
women.
I did the bars and the birds, isn't it? It's always, how many times I heard that?
Man's ruin, as they say, isn't it? So
yeah.
That it was a typical story, and I looking back and reflecting on it, I wasn't committed enough, and that's my own fault. So there'll always be that what if. I had some good years playing sort of professionally and semi-professionally, but did I fulfil my potential? No, not in my head, because I wanted to be a household name.
But you had a good time doing it.
I had a good time for a few years, yeah, but you can't do it forever, and the body starts to give out. And if you're not as good as some of your contemporaries, which I'm happy to admit now I wasn't. I played with the likes of Johnny Wilkinson, and I look back at.
I mean, they're proper players, aren't they?
Yeah. But I look back at someone like Johnny, and he was back then. You could tell he was gifted. I was good, but I wouldn't go as far as to say I was gifted.
Okay.
People like that have that something special.
I've looked at it. My own son went through some footballing academies at Southampton, and it's sort of like I could never see. And then all of a sudden, someone points it out, and they go, "Actually, he's got that half a yard there, and that half a yard puts him in another bracket altogether." Exactly
that. Yeah. And even back then, you could tell people like that just were that bit ahead of you. So would I have made it? Who knows? But did I fulfil my potential? Did I take the chances? No.
So the firefighting stuff. Let's move slightly to firefighting. Were you one of these kids who every time we saw a fire engine when you was a kid, wow, there they go?
A little bit. Yeah, I do remember, because I was at university in Nottingham, and I was still, for a long time, I was trying to find out who was I, because in my head I was going to play professional rugby, and I didn't really have a plan B. And so when I broke my shoulder, I had a bit of a rude awakening, actually, and it was probably one of the best things that could have happened looking back now. But I broke my shoulder, and I got released from a contract quite unceremoniously, and not in a very personal manner.
These sporting contracts. See ya.
Because I'm from the era when rugby first turned professional, so I would have played regardless of whether I'd been paid or not. And it was just, I was around at that time when the game turned professional, and in many ways I think it ruined it. But we are where we are, but it turned it into a business, and I really realised that when I got dropped from my contract. And I think, if I remember rightly, it was done via text. I didn't even get a meeting.
That's the same. I've got so many stories I've heard, especially in the world of football.
Dear.
World of football, it'll be a text to your mother, not even to you.
Yeah. So it's pretty. Pretty serious. And you just think, I've just given sort of 4 years of my life, and so I've spilled blood for you, and that's how I get repaid. But it was a business at that time, and things were moving on quite quickly, and I just don't think I never really returned to that level, because of that made me realise, actually, it was a bit of a wake up call that this isn't forever, probably, and I thought I really need to focus on getting some qualifications.
So did you look straight towards the firefighting stuff, or was that something you discovered as part of your sort of like development with qualifications, etc.?
Yeah, so I was doing sports science at university and things like that, so it was a bit of a natural progression, but I was looking down the avenues of military, emergency services. I was never going to sit in an office, put it that way. I wasn't wired that way.
Yeah.
I needed to be kept active, and if I wasn't going to be a professional rugby player, I had to start thinking what occupation is going to keep me active and allow me to use some of maybe what the gifts I do have, and you start to realise sort of around that age what your strengths and weaknesses are. And sat down twiddling my thumbs in an office I knew it wouldn't be for the life of me.
Yeah.
So I started getting interested in it around then, and I remember sort of sitting outside Nottingham fire station. I was at uni up there, and watching them drill in the yard, and they all looked like real, macho.
Yeah.
I thought, I fancy a bit of that.
So when you finished, was that your first? Did you go straight and recruit? How does it work? I mean, I went to the recruiting office, all that sort of stuff. How does it work to become a fireman?
Yes, similar. So I went down to my local station, and I asked to spend some time with them and get an insight into that world. And then I started the application phase, but it's quite a long process. Back then it was sort of, it was like an 8-month journey to get through all the tests.
Wow.
And, there's so many tests, and you don't hear from them again unless you've been successful at the last test. So, and you have to do the written tests, interviews, physical tests, physical aptitude tests. What
were the physical tests like?
Back then they were quite stringent. I would say over the years that has been lessened a little bit to maybe level the playing field a little bit. But and maybe that's probably a little bit unfair. It's probably become a bit more job specific now, some of the tests.
A good way of putting it, like that. That's a
yeah,
diplomatic way of putting it.
Yeah, so they'll get you to carry certain things that you're likely to carry on an incident and things like that. Whereas back then it was just a raw test of your fitness. And then you were tested at height, you were tested in enclosed spaces, you were tested in heat and humidity and all of those sorts of things, which, because if you've never been in an enclosed space or you've never been hanging off the top of a ladder, you don't know how you're going to react to that physiologically. Yeah. So physical aptitude tests are really important because just some people are perfectly capable, but they're just not physically able to do certain things. And, we all have to recognise our limitations, and that's an important part of learning who you are. And years later, I became an instructor, and one of the biggest elements of me teaching them was to teach them their own limits. You have to know your own limitations because, as you all know, if you don't know your own limitations, you're not only putting yourself in danger, but you're putting your oppo in danger.
It's a dangerous thing.
Exactly.
Yeah. So you joined the fire brigade.
Mm-hmm.
Just tell me a little bit about what it was like in those days as being a fireman. Your calls. Where did you go? What did you do? Do you know?
So I've been in now over 23 years. So I'm an old sweat now. And I joined in the days, you could argue, when the culture wasn't so good. I know the fire service has come under fire a lot recently, and there's been a lot more transparency in sort of culture reviews and things like that. And that's, they're welcomed because unless you have a transparent look at yourself and an honest look at yourself, you don't know where things might be going wrong. You might be blind to it. So that's a good thing, and we've recognised that, it's typical that sort of the age, the era, if you like, when I joined, and you'll recognise a lot of this. It was very macho. It was male dominated.
Yeah.
And showing any kind of feelings was arguably a sign of weakness. We didn't talk about mental health or anything like that.
Yeah.
It just wasn't done. So back then, there were no real support networks. We had no chats as recruits about sort of the things you're going to see and your experiences you're going to have. So it's a rude awakening when it starts to happen.
Right. So you've been on. So what would you say would be the average call out? Because it's not a fire every time you get called out.
No.
So long stretch in imagination.
No. So you've got your routine calls, which are just automatic fire alarms, and you have to go and check it out. But then obviously you've got fires of all different natures, chemical incidents. A lot of your bread and butter is car crashes, rail crashes, plane crashes, rescues from height, rescues from underground. We're all singing, all dancing, jack of all trades kind of thing.
Do you know what the funny thing was? And I do remember someone once telling me that if you've got a problem in your house, don't call the police, call the fire brigade, because 8 men will turn out of an axe each. Do you know what I mean?
And therein lies the problem sometimes, because we do get called out to a lot of stuff that isn't really what we should be getting used for. And the problem with that is people have that mentality that the fire service are going to help, and we want to help because we're inherently wired like that, but it does take resources away from what could be a real incident, in another location.
Can I throw you straight into sort of like a fire, as it were, myself now, and ask you, what was the worst call-out you've ever had? What was the worst thing you ever had to attend to?
Well, that's a very, very easy one for me, very close to home. December the 12th, 2021, and that was, I went to my mother's own death. She had a cardiac event. And I went to that. So straight up, I will always say that was obviously my worst.
Yeah, no, that must have been absolutely. Did you know you were going to your mother's house to deal with something like that? Did you find that in the truck on the way or something?
I had an inkling. I was on a duty weekend as an officer, and I was warned by a duty group commander that the ID found on the lady in question could suggest that it was my mum. And basically, it was a bit of a heads up not to attend, but I'm going to attend. And to be honest, I always attended. If control ever let me know about sort of a red call, we call them assist other agencies. It's a big part of what we do, and we get called by other agencies to assist. And normally with the ambulance, that is an event of that, some sort of a medical event, because obviously our guys and girls are really highly trained, and trauma care specialists and things like that, and you know, sort of just one level down from a paramedic really. So really highly skilled. So we get called to assist a lot and things like that. And but we're only meant to really go on what we consider sort of the red calls, which are normally 9 times out of 10. Unfortunately, they sort of they do tend to end in a fatality. So
I mean, you really are getting called out on the worst day of people's lives when you turn up at these things, aren't you? So that's
yeah,
you know.
you are, and that day ended up being sort of the worst day of my life. But I always elected to go, because often you're just informed as an officer that one of these calls is occurring, but I always elect to go to support the crew for their welfare, because I know 9 times out of 10 how this is going to end. And so that was no different in that sense that day, and I chose to. I would have attended regardless. When I was informed that it could be my mum, obviously that added another layer of emotion to it, but I switched off because I didn't know, so I attended as I would any other, you know, and you resort, and this is where again you'll know this, you just drop back into the safety of your training, and you just go into a mode and you just operate.
Yeah, of course you do, and that's why there is that level of intense training, so that you can, you know,
exactly, yeah,
it
and
does keep you on the rails, as it were, during.
Yeah, because you can't, you know, if one of your oppos goes down next to you, you've still got a job to do. You'll try and see to them in a second, but if you're in a firefight, you've got to crack on with the job at hand. And it's a similar thing, you know. You drop back into a mode, and you just function the way you've always been trained to function, and it's an instinct. So yeah, but then obviously when the dust settles and the adrenaline starts seeping out hours later, and then it sort of hits home.
That's what I call the Glad to Be Alive club, and that's when you sort of like realise how close things were and all that sort of stuff, and you go, wow, that was insane. You know.
And sometimes, you know, I'll get back from a call, and I'll sit there and I'll try and decompress. Because often the difficulty for me now is, as an officer, I miss the element. You know, when I used to go out in a big red truck, we'd come back to the station and there'd be the black humour, and you know, there's ways of dealing with stuff. You'd make light of it, and with your support network and your watch. But as an officer, a lot of the time, I'll have seen what the crew have seen, but then I'll go home on my own, and you know, I don't want to take that baggage. Just
for the people that are listening on this, and I want this to come across, and I'm not doing this because I want to be hunting grisly stuff.
Yeah.
The sort of stuff that you're seeing, I want people to understand what it is that you see, because it's part of your life, isn't it? And to understand what you go through, and especially to push out the mental health, I think people have to understand where things have gone wrong. So what's when you talk grisly, I mean, you're obviously talking some pretty horrific scenes.
Yeah, and like you said a minute ago, you know, we see people in their worst hour. I had a fatal incident 2 nights ago where I was physically doing CPR, because it was one of those jobs where it was all hands on deck, because it was a really dynamic situation. I couldn't stand back and sort of instruct people. I had to jump in there, and we were doing what's called pit crew CPR, and you do what you have to do, and unfortunately that was a fatality. And I had 2 young lads on the crew that night, and that was their first. They're quite new, and that was their first fatality. So I take that opportunity now, and I'm sure we'll talk a bit more about the mental health side. But I took that opportunity to go back to the station with them for that decompression. I had a cup of coffee with them, and we had a chat about what we had just done and seen, because it's good to have that. You know, that calm moment after. How
much training do firefighters receive in regards to sort of like, you are going to see major organs on the floor, you're going to see bits severed, you're going to see some really horrible, disgusting stuff. Is it talked about beforehand? Do you sort of like say, look, you're likely to see this, and is that part of the preparation?
Yeah. When I joined, no, is the easy answer. Very little. We were basically told, if you get any issues, the occupational health unit is up the end of the corridor, kind of thing. And
that's always said tongue-in-cheek in those days as well, wasn't it? Like, if you want to go, off you go, like, do you know what I mean?
Yeah, so if you have any issues, you go and see them. Yeah. And that was it. That was your support. And but now we're a lot more proactive. The tide is turning, you know, in the forces and the emergency services. We've become, mental health and well-being has become much more prevalent now. We're being a lot more proactive about it, and pushing it out there. And the tide is turning. We're still not there. So mental health is still, I still think, is a way off being seen on a par with a physical injury. But
I see it. You know, with the military stuff as well.
Yeah, exactly. But we're on the right path.
Do you think more can be done to prepare people for those situations?
I do, and we're trying to counter that now with, we will go firefighters, or you'll know, sort of trim advisors and stuff like that for the mental health stuff. We'll go in to a recruit squad and have that sort of chat and talk about the mental health aspect of it and what they're likely to see and experience. Because nothing can prepare you for that in the forces and the services. You come from you've either been a school kid or you've come from another job, what I call real world. And then and that's what I reminded the troops the other night. We came back from this job and I said, in 10 minutes time, we're going to finish our coffees and we're going to go, and we've got to return to real life.
To your family,
you're
exactly.
Going
to be putting kids to bed, you're going to be
kissing
the missus on the cheek and having your dinner.
Yeah. And that's why I try and have that moment of decompression now before I go home, because as an officer I can get called out from my home address and I've got to go home. And actually I was thankful the other night, it was in the middle of the night, so I knew my wife would be asleep and stuff, and because she means well, and she says, "Oh, what did you go to? How was it?" And I don't want to talk about it. I don't want to. She didn't sign up to that life, and
you don't need to burden her, but at the same time, you need to let her know that you're
she's
dealing with it.
Yeah, so she knows. Obviously, I have baggage, and I have some mental health issues that I'm dealing with and have been dealing with for a number of years, and so she is supportive. She's very aware of some of the things I struggle with. But that has all manifested itself because years ago I never processed anything, and you have as a psychologist says, you've got that proverbial shoebox in your head, and every incident or traumatic memory, there's a snapshot of it goes into that shoebox, and for many years you might be all right, you keep the lid on, but after it was 20 years in my case, the lid pops off because there's too many.
I call it pigeonholing. I'll say you've got pigeonholes in there, and all of a sudden you'll just go, "Oh, what's in that one?" Do you know what I mean? You're like, "Wow."
Exactly, yeah. And they all spill out, and then you suddenly realise I'm pretty messed up here. I've never dealt with any of this, and now I've got to try and unravel it and do something about it. But, and the catalyst was for me, the motivation to get help was my family. When I was on my own, I could kind of be, we can be, as blokes, we can be selfish and bury our head in the sand, and I probably would have carried on just burying my head in the sand.
I think a lot of people as well treat it with drink and stuff like that, don't they?
Well, I went down that avenue. Yeah, went down that avenue for a bit of escapism, anything to get away from the thoughts in my head, and anything to avoid going to sleep. And it becomes a slippery slope, and you spiral. And I dipped in and out of treatment over the years, and being a typical bloke, I went to see the shrink once. I thought he'd give me something to sort me out, and I'd come back and no one would be none the wiser. But I now know it doesn't work like that, because a lot of these things are deeply entrenched and they take some unravelling. And so it wasn't sort of till 2017 that I committed to a full. I promised my wife I'd commit to a full program with a psychologist, and that's sort of really where my treatment started. And I've been in full-time treatment since sort of 2017.
Has it made things better at home?
It has. I'm a realist, so I say, I'm a work in progress, and I possibly always will be. There may never be a time where I'm what you can say I'm better, I'm healed. That time may never come. I'm realistic about that, and I'm not naive, but I'm in a better place than where I once was, and I'm trying to be proactive about it. And I think the better side for me now is that I know more about my condition, and I'm more aware of it. I'm more aware of what my triggers are. I've got some coping mechanisms that I've learned over the years now to try and go down another path when I see the red flags.
Yeah.
So there's ways and means of doing things now where I can try and avoid that, and I know what makes me tick, and I can see things coming. When I had a breakdown many years ago, and it's primarily because I didn't see anything coming. I'd always ignored all this stuff, and
lip service type.
Yeah, and then it hit me, and and it took me out. It's hit me from the side. I didn't see it coming. I was unprepared for it. I'd ignored it for a long, long time, and then I was in real trouble, and that's when I really spiralled. So
sport's a big thing for you now as well, isn't it?
It is, yeah. I call it it's my therapy, essentially. So many years ago, I was on a host of antidepressants. I was on so many different concoctions of drugs, it was unreal. And I didn't know if they were good for me, bad for me, just sort of...
Side effects going to happen, all that sort of stuff.
Yeah, and I remember at one time being on like a derivative of like Prozac, which really got some bad press years later because they discovered that it gave you suicidal tendencies. And I remember around that time I was struggling with some of that. And so I was really determined. I hated that I was on antidepressants. I hated the fact that I was relying on some sort of chemical to make me a normal, neurotypical person. So it was a real stigma in my head being on antidepressants because it labelled me as someone that was mentally ill, and I was desperate to get off them. So over time, I found that, my escapism, actually, the one thing that I did maintain, even through the periods where I was quite ill, was I kept going to the gym. It was in my DNA. I'd always worked out. It was my sort of time away, and I realised actually when I was in the gym and I was working out or I was running or I was doing whatever form of exercise it was, I was only focused on that, and my mind wasn't really drifting off to the other stuff, which gave me trouble. So I soon realised that actually, do you know what? There's something in this. My escapism needs to be more of this. I need to do more of this. So I became really sort of obsessive.
It's like a safe space for you.
It was, yeah.
I can go in there, and I can pump iron, or I can get on a treadmill, or
exactly.
I can bounce up and down, whatever I'm going to do. It's all good.
And I don't think it's a coincidence that, what I do now and what I'm probably known for now is sort of the endurance events that I do. And, people think I'm pretty crazy, but actually the more that something looks impossible, the more it appeals to me. The more people.
Oh, no, I mean, Marathon Des Sables is one I know you've done.
Yeah, I've done that a couple of times. Yeah,
a couple of times.
Yeah. Yeah, I've run.
There's not many people go back again, is there? Yeah.
Well, I had to because I was I got ill on the first one, and I mean this will all come out in a documentary because they filmed it all. I mean I was half unconscious. I don't remember, but I was found in between two checkpoints on day 4.
Really? If the camel train catches you up, it's all over then, isn't it?
It is, yeah. The saying is mind the camels. And I didn't know what that was until I went out there. But yeah, the camels, if the camels catch you, you're at the back and they'll take you out of the race. Yeah. And yeah, I was unconscious. I don't remember a lot about it the first time I went out there. That was on day 4, so I was medically withdrawn on that one. But so I had to go back, but the problem is in between that one and the next time I went out there, I only had 4 months, and I thought that's fine because it had been postponed so many times because of COVID. This was all during the COVID time, and it kept, it's on, it's off, it's on, it's off, and so I was training for that for like 2 years, and my body was starting to fall apart because of the volume. But I was filming the documentary, and the film crew were following me, and they were out in the desert, and then it didn't go the way I'd planned to. And for me, it was almost like I saw that event as, the flag post at the end of my journey. That was the pinnacle of my mental health journey, and that was going to solve. I was going to do the Marathon Des Sables, and that was going to solve everything.
Everything done, yeah.
But it doesn't. It doesn't. It makes you realise actually it's just another event, and I've done many like that. And actually, when I came back from that, I spiralled again because I was so depressed. I hadn't achieved what I wanted to achieve. Then my mum died as well that Christmas, and then in the April I went back out to the desert with that fresh in my memory and having to focus on doing it again. But that's where my mindset and resilience comes in, and I went out there and I achieved what I set out to do initially. But it did make me realise at the end of that, 4 years of my life pretty much I dedicated to that one event. And at the end of it, when I succeeded, I just thought, actually, it makes you realise what's important, and what's important is what you already knew. It's your family and your loved ones.
Yeah, of course it is, yeah.
Yeah, so it's funny because I remember looking at the trailer for the documentary, and one of the things I say in the trailer is, I'd heard it so many times, it's a bit of a strapline, the person that goes out to the desert is very different to the person that comes back.
Yeah.
And I thought I was going to have some sort of epiphany moment out there, and it was going to solve all my mental health troubles, and I was going to suddenly see the light. But actually, no, it just makes you realise what is important, and
that is a way of seeing the light in a way.
It is.
Do you know what I mean?
Yeah, I'm glad.
I'm going to tell you, it's a 4-year way, a long way round, isn't it? But it's there, isn't it?
Yeah, it is, and you've probably experienced that yourself. Like
boxing does it for me. I love my boxing. Do you know what I mean? I love to have a fight to be focused on.
Yeah.
I train relentlessly for it. I eat, I diet, I do the whole thing.
Yeah.
When that fight's over, I go, oh.
Spiral.
Yeah. But like I say, the important thing is, everything is better from having done it. Do you know what I mean?
It is totally, and I try and keep sight of that now because I get exactly the same thing. I get the blues after one of my events because I love to have something on the horizon I'm training for, a goal, an ambition, and once I've done it, I'm like, right, what do I do now? And so I have got into the habit of, right, I've got to find something else now. I've got to find something else because that's how I tick. But the problem is with me doing these big events around the world that are quite famous for being like the toughest or branded the toughest foot race in the world is how do you top that? So you've always got to try and look for something.
I was talking about someone earlier about it. I was having a conversation about some of the stuff you'd done. You found the Isle of Wight all the way around. That was quite a beast, wasn't it?
Yeah, that is a bastard.
Yeah.
sorry for the swearing.
That's all right, don't worry about that. But yeah, there is sort of. Where do you go once you've done the hardest one? Do you go to the North Pole and do one? Do you go underground?
Well, funny you should say that.
You know what I mean? What was your come on?
I do have some ambitions. I'm conscious I'm getting older, so I can't carry on doing this forever. Endurance challenges like this, the feats of endurance do take it out of your body, and I won't be able to do it forever. So I am conscious that I want to crack on, but I do still have some ambition. I want to. One of the things I want to achieve is I want to finish all the Abbott World Marathon Majors. So there's certain marathons around the world that are considered the World Marathon Majors. You've got London, Tokyo, Berlin, Chicago, New York. So I've ticked off half of them. I still need to finish them off. I want to run an ultra marathon on every continent. There's still quite a few goals that I haven't achieved, and that would include North and South Pole. So
there you go.
So it is doable. It's a lot of logistics, and it can be quite costly. So part of that is drumming up sponsorship and things like that, because I have self-funded most of my events, and something like the Marathon Des Sables is horrifically expensive. Which means it's not possible for most normal people on a normal budget, because it is very difficult. Just to be on the start line for Marathon Des Sables, you're looking at sort of $4,500, and then
it's a lot of dough, isn't it?
Exactly. And then once you've had all your medicals, your insurance, all the specialist gear, you won't get much change out of $10,000. And that's, when you look at that, that's just one race. It's quite hard to justify to your family. And that's. But the problem is, it shouldn't be exclusively just for the people who've got loads of money. These events should be open to anyone.
What you're saying, so what you're actually getting out of doing these events is therapeutic in itself, isn't it?
It is. For me, it's and like I say, I hinted towards it, alluded towards it earlier, that I don't think it's a coincidence that a lot of the people I've met on my events are ex-forces, are emergency services, and have a lot of mental baggage. And that's one of the reasons why they're there.
And not just so much mental baggage, but a lot of people that I speak to who've come from sort of like our backgrounds, which are very similar in a way. You need something in your life.
Yeah.
I need something in my life. I have to have something I'm going for. Do you know what I mean? I have to be achieving something, or feel I'm achieving something, or helping out somewhere.
Yeah.
Because if I'm not, I feel deflated.
Yeah.
Like an empty windsock. I'm like, what have I got?
Cathartic release, because otherwise things build and build and build, and typical blokes, we just end up exploding and doing something stupid or emotional, or going out drinking or something. I mean, I tend to avoid anything like that now. I don't really drink. I don't really.
I've been off the drink this year myself, and that was a huge thing, because I've always been I love the pub. I love my football. I love going out on a Saturday. Do you know what I mean? And actually, I thought I was going to really struggle, but I haven't.
Yeah, no, I don't miss it at all. I don't drink socially. I don't drink at home. I don't need it. It's not something I need. But once upon a time, back in my rugby days, I don't think I could have ever imagined life without
you can't
going
picture
out on a
life,
Friday and a Saturday night, and with the lads. And
I once worked out that you only had a couple of thousand Saturday nights in your life if you were lucky.
Really?
Do you know what I mean? And I worked out how many you had, and I thought, hang on, that's not enough for me.
Problem is I can't remember half of them. That's the problem. But so the one side I've got my endurance events, and that's what I'm known for. But really, you know, I'm not an elite athlete anymore. I'm not of an age where I'm going to be winning these things. So for me now, I'm lucky to have a platform and some decent sponsors and backers behind me, and starting to get a bit of a media presence with the documentary and everything that's been going on. So I can use that platform to raise awareness of mental health,
which is great. Which is another journey almost, isn't it?
It is, and that's become a passion for me now.
So is that sort of like that? Your focus is now swinging away from sort of like
it is, and I'm thinking
where
about,
it was, and now you're thinking this is where my real forte is now.
Well, yeah, I mean, it's a weird turnaround, because prior to 2017, I'd kept this a secret. It was a 20-year secret. I hadn't said this to anyone, you know, that was suffering with any kind of mental health issues. And when it all came out, I thought I don't want it to be in vain. Otherwise, what have I achieved? You know, I've let my guard down, so to speak, and people know that I've got some issues now. And you know, so what am I hoping to achieve by doing that? Firstly, try and get better, try and make life better for my family, because I was bringing my issues home, and I don't want to affect their life, and I want my kids to grow up with a normal dad, and one that doesn't have to shut himself in a dark room and not be with anyone, and constantly distant and distracted. And so I wanted to get better for them and for my own health and well-being. But the other thing I started to realise was I want to try and help other people, because I come from that era where there was no support, there was no acknowledgement or recognition of mental health.
No.
And we're now trying to do something about that, be proactive. So, you know, in the workplace, I'm trying to improve our resources and provision of mental health, what we're doing for people, how we're raising awareness. I do a lot of ambassador and charity work for mental health charities and organisations. And so I'm using my events really as a bit of a platform to raise awareness and raise funds sometimes for it. I've raised quite a lot of funds for the FireFighters charity. FireFighters charity is really, really unique charity, and to our profession, we're really, really lucky. And I know a lot of services and forces have their own sort of version of that, you know, like benevolent funds and things like that, and combat stress and all this sort of thing. But the FireFighters charity have been amazing, and so I've raised money towards their mental health recovery programs and things like that. And not long ago, they had me again down in Harkham House in Devon at one of their recuperation centres for a welfare week. And they're just they're angels in the dark sometimes. So, but they're a charity, and like any charity, especially after COVID, really, really struggling. So I'd like to try and raise money.
It's really hard, isn't it? Because everybody's got their own charity, everybody's competing for the same money out of the same pockets, really, aren't we? Do you know what I mean? Which is incredible. Yeah, and COVID really, really affected a lot of charities, and they're running in the red throughout that time. Well, two things. COVID affected the charities and their abilities to get around and do stuff, but it also affected a lot of people. You know, a lot of people sat at home for that 2 years.
Yeah, they did, yeah.
With no help whatsoever.
No.
Staring at the wall, staring at the missus. Yeah. You know, things spiralling downwards the whole time, wasn't it?
Yeah, and exactly. And they did say that if anything was going to come from COVID, it was going to be a mental health pandemic that we were going to see, because it really affected people, you know, not just the obvious illnesses and death that came from COVID and that horrible time, but it was the mental health aspect. People didn't realise they had mental health issues until they were stuck indoors at home, and then suddenly all of a sudden there was a heightened awareness of it. And actually, you know, I kind of see that as a crest of a wave. And again, let's utilise that, let's leverage that to try and raise awareness. And so again, I try and just do that now, and that's kind of become my role. And I'm potentially 4 years away from retirement now, so I am starting to think of life after. What am I going to do? And you know, I'd like to do something in a mental health space. I don't know yet, but hopefully, you know, I've often said that if people can relate to my story, they can seek inspiration to seek help off the back of that, then it's been worth sort of opening up.
100%. You know, I can see it in you. Do you know what I mean? And it's a make no bone about it. It's a brave thing to, like you say, you've let your guard down. You've thrown all your cards on the table and let people sort of like mull through them and what have you. Do you know what I mean?
I was massively worried about it, I'll be honest. Back in 2017, I was really, really panicking. I remember the first post I put about it on social media, where I opened up and I let my guard down a little bit and stuck my head over the parapet, and I really, really worried. It was a massive mental blocker for me because I'd come from that generation where we didn't talk about stuff. And then when I saw the response was so positive, I was really touched. I was really shocked, and I thought, blimey, I never expected that. And it was really nice. I expected some sort of a backlash, some sort of negative, people like, oh, you're just attention seeking, this, that and the other. And I was really worried about it, but it was the complete opposite. It had a really good reaction and actually clearly touched a nerve of a lot of people. And I get people phoning me now from in work circles and outside of work saying, I just want to say, thanks for speaking up and thanks for doing this, thanks for saying that, and thanks for doing that podcast or whatever, because I'm not quite as far down my journey as you, but it's made me realise that I need to get help and things. And
I think that's the most important thing, is that people, at the end of all this, people realise that it's okay to actually stick your hand up and go, wow, I need help. Do you know what I mean? And the sooner they do it, the better it's going to be for them as well, isn't it?
It is, and it may be a long road. And like I say, I've been in full-time therapy since 2017, and I'm sitting here now saying I'm not healed, I'm not better, and I am a work in progress, and I understand that could always be the case, but I'm miles ahead of where I once was, and I'm in a much better place, and I can try, and it doesn't mean that I'm not going to suffer from these thoughts that come into my head, but I can now see them coming a bit better.
Compartmentalise them,
exactly.
Put them where they need to be, counteract them.
Try and do something about it.
Yeah.
So I'm in a better place.
So very briefly, because we're going to run out of time eventually, right? Very briefly, your future now. What do you see as your future?
So I would like to finish my career. I'm at a point now where I do want to leave the fire service. I think it's made me quite unwell, but I'm professional enough I want to see out my time with distinction and credibility.
I don't think anyone's ever going to challenge that.
Well, I never go sick, and I know that, again, that's not a badge of honour, but it's, for me, I need to be kept distracted.
Your sense of duty is shining out throughout this interview, to be honest, mate.
Well,
you know what I mean?
Well, good, because I'm really conscientious about how I'm seen, and I want to be seen as a professional. I want to be seen as being good at my job, and when I go, I want people to say, say what you like about him. All right, maybe he was a bit outspoken at times, maybe he was a bit rebellious, but he was really good at his job, and he had a passion for making other people better and seek help and things like that. And if I'm going to leave any kind of legacy in my job, it'll be that. But I'm ready to go. It has made me quite ill, but I'm glad I did it. I'm glad. I'd like to think I've made a difference over the years in some people's lives, and certainly in those worst moments, I've had the opportunity to help people, and I'll always be thankful for that. But it will leave me with a lot of memories that I will never forget. And when I move forward, what will I do? Maybe something in the mental health space. Maybe I'll completely walk away from it and try something different. I don't know, but I'm still young enough to do something and make an impact somewhere. But we'll see where that is.
But from my point of view, I think you're a great ambassador for the word duty.
Thank you.
You really are. You absolutely shine out there. Your story's incredible. You haven't finished yet. You're keeping going. And it's been a pleasure to have you on my podcast. So
it's been a pleasure meeting you and talking to you, Phil. Thank you.
I'd love to thank you for your time.
No, thank you. Thank you. It's a pleasure to meet you.
All right.
Thanks,
nice
Phil.
One.
Thank you.